Hello, everyone. There is exciting news today because today is the last video, which is a re upload from my old channel, Mike History 2, meaning that now all the new videos that you've suggested to me will finally be made after this. So, without further ado, let's talk about the history of the Solomon Islands. So, the history of the Solomon Islands begins in 1568 when the Spanish explorer Alvaro de Mendana de Neira saw Santa Isabel Island on February 6th. Finding signs of gold on Guadalcanal, Mendaña believed that he'd found the source of King Solomon's wealth, and consequently named the Islands of Solomon. In 1595 and 1605, Spain again sent several expeditions to find the islands and conquer it. However, these were unsuccessful. Later, Dutch, French, and British navigators visited the islands, and the reception was often hostile. Sikaina was claimed by Hawaii, of all countries, in 1856, but was never actually conquered. Christian missionaries started arriving in the mid-19th century, and in 1885 Prussia conquered the North Solomon Islands, naming it the Prussian Solomon Islands Protectorate. After the Anglo-Prussian declarations about the Western Pacific Ocean in 1886, in 1893 the United Kingdom conquered the Southern Solomon Islands as part of the British Solomon Islands Protectorate. In 1899, Prussia gave up its territory to the United Kingdom in exchange for the United Kingdom's recognition of Prussia's ownership of Samoa as part of the Tripartite Convention. In 1927, the district commissioner William R. Bell was killed on Malaita along with 14 others by Basiana, a leader of the Kwayo people. In response, 60 Kwayo people were killed and many sacred sites and objects destroyed during what became known as the Malaita Massacre. 200 people were imprisoned on Tulagi and Basiana, and Basiana was hanged on June 29, 1928. In 1939, World War II broke out, and in January 1942, Japan conquered the Solomon Islands. In August, American troops landed on Guadalcanal and Tulagi. In 1945, the war ended and the Solomon Islands once again became British, but the impact of the war on the islanders was profound. The destruction caused by the fighting and the long-term consequences of the introduction of modern materials, machinery, and Western cultural artifacts transformed traditional, isolated island ways of life. The reconstruction was slow in the absence of war reparations, and with the destruction of the pre-war plantations, formerly the mainstay of the economy. In 1956, a movement for social, economic, and political improvement using cooperative economic enterprises in combination with a regard for custom and tradition to synthesize a new social order, called the Moro movement, began on Guadalcanal. As late as 1970, the British did not consider independence for the Solomon Islands in the foreseeable future. Shortly after, it became harder to support the British Solomon Islands Protectorate as the world economy was hit by the first oil price shock in 1973. The imminent independence of Papua New Guinea in 1975, which by the way I made a video about, was also thought to have influenced the British Solomon Islands Protectorate's administrators. Self-government was granted in January 1976, and after July 1976, Peter Kenilorea became the chief minister who led the country to independence. Independence was finally achieved on July 7, 1978, and Kenilorea automatically became the country's first prime minister. In early 1999, long-simmering tensions between the Gwale people on Guadalcanal and more recent migrants from the neighboring island of Malaita erupted into violence. The Guadalcanal Revolutionary Army, later called the Isatabu Freedom Movement, began terrorizing Malaitans in the rural areas of the island to make them leave their homes. About 20,000 Malaitans fled to the capital and others returned to their home island. Gwale residents of Honiara fled. The city became a Malaitan enclave. Meanwhile, the Malaita Eagle Force was formed to uphold Malaitan interests. The Honiara Peace Accord was agreed on June 28, 1999. Despite this apparent success, the underlying problems remain unresolved and had already resulted in the death or serious injury of 30,000 civilians. The accord soon broke down and fighting broke out again in June 2000. Malaitans took over some armories at their home island in Honiara and were helped by the fact that on June 5, 2000, the Malaita Eagle Force seized the parliament by force. Through their spokesman, Andrew Nori, they claimed that the government of the then Prime Minister, Bartholomew Ulufa'alu, had failed to secure compensation for the loss of Malaitan life and property. Ulufa'alu was forced to step down. On June 30, 2000, Parliament elected by narrow margin a new Prime Minister, Manasseh Sogavare. He established a coalition for national unity, reconciliation, and peace, which released a program of action focused on resolving the ethnic conflict, restoring the economy, and disrupting the benefits of development more equally. However, Sogavare's government was deeply corrupt, and his actions led to the downward economic spiral and the deterioration of law and order. The war was mostly about access to land and other resources, and was centered on Honiara. Since the beginning of the civil war, it is estimated that 100 had been killed. About 30,000 refugees, mainly Malaitans, had to leave their homes, and economic activity on Guadalcanal was severely disrupted. The security forces were unable to reassert control, largely because many police and security personnel were associated with one or another of the rival gangs. In July 2003, the Governor General of the Solomon Islands issued an official request for international help, which was subsequently endorsed by a unanimous vote of the Parliament. Technically, only the Governor General's request for troops, however, was necessary. On July 6, 2003, in response to a proposal to send 300 police and 2,000 troops from Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, and Papua New Guinea to Guadalcanal, warlord Harold Keke announced a ceasefire. Despite this ceasefire, on July 11, 2003, the Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation broadcast unconfirmed reports that supporters of Harold Keke had destroyed 2 villages. In mid-July 2003, the Solomons Parliament voted unanimously in favor of the proposed intervention. The international force began gathering at a training facility in Townsville. Well, that's like the most unoriginal name ever. In August 2003, an international peacekeeping force known as the Regional Assistance Mission to the Solomon Islands entered the islands. Australia committed the largest number of security personnel, with substantial numbers also from other countries such as New Zealand, Fiji, and Papua New Guinea. It acts as an interim police force and is responsible for restoring law and order in the country because the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force failed to do so. Peacekeeping forces have been successful, improving the country's overall security conditions, including brokering the surrender of Harold Keke in August 2003. In 2006, riots broke out following the election of Snyder Rini as Prime Minister. The commercial heart of Honiara was basically reduced to rubble and ashes. The Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands intervened, sending in more police and army officers to bring the situation under control. A vote of no confidence was passed against the Prime Minister. Following his resignation, a 5-party Grand Coalition was formed. In May 2006, with Manasseh Sogavare as Prime Minister, quelling the riots and running the government. The army part of Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands was removed and rebuilding started. The government continues to face serious problems, including an uncertain economic future, deforestation, and malaria control. At one point prior to the deployment of Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands forces, the country was facing a serious financial crisis. While economic conditions are improving, the situation remains unstable. In 1992, Cyclone Tia struck the island of Tikopia, wiping out most housing and food. In 1997, the government asked help from the United States and Japan to clean up more than 50 sunken World War II shipwrecks, polluting coral reefs and killing marine life. In December 2002, severe tropical cyclone Zoe struck Tikopia and Anuta, cutting off contact with 3,000 inhabitants. Due to funding problems, the Solomon Islands government could not send relief until Australia, which by the way I also made several videos about, provided funding. In April 2014, the islands were struck by Cyclone Eta. Throughout the Solomons, at least 23 people were killed, while up to 40 others remained unaccounted for as of April 6th. An estimated 49,000 people were affected by the floods, of whom 9,000 were left homeless. As Cyclone Eta affected the islands, local authorities issued heavy flood warnings, tropical disturbance, and cyclone watches. Nearly 2 days of continuous heavy rains from the storm caused flash flooding in the islands. Over a 4-day span, more than 1,000 millimeters fell at the Gold Ridge mine in Guadalcanal, with 500 millimeters falling in 1 day. The Matanikau River, which runs through the capital city, Honiara, broke its banks on April 3rd and flooded many nearby communities. Thousands of homes, along with the city's 2 main bridges, were washed away, stranding numerous residents. The National Hospital had to evacuate 500 patients to other facilities due to flooding. Severe flooding took place on Guadalcanal. Immediately after the floods, Honiara and Guadalcanal were declared disaster areas by the Solomon government. Debris left behind by the floods initially stopped relief efforts, with the runway at Honiara International Airport blocked by destroyed homes. Food supplies started running low as the Red Cross provided aid to the thousands of homeless people. The airport was reopened on April 6th, allowing for supplies from Australia and New Zealand to be delivered. Roughly 20% of Honiara's population was relocated to evacuation centers as entire communities were swept away by the floods. There were fears that the flood could worsen an already ongoing dengue fever outbreak can cause outbreaks of diarrhea and conjunctivitis. New Zealand offered an immediate 300,000 New Zealand dollars in funds and deployed a C-130 Hercules with supplies and emergency response personnel. Australia donated 250,000 Australian dollars on April 6th and sent engineers and response teams to aid in relief efforts. On April 8th, Australia increased aid package to 3 million Australian dollars, while New Zealand provided an additional 1.2 million New Zealand dollars. Finally, Taiwan provided 200,000 American dollars in funds. So as you can see, the Solomon Islands isn't exactly a great place to live. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this. I'm so glad I'm finally done re-uploading all my old videos after 16 months, so now I can finally make something new soon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you next time.